Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into one of the most transformative periods in all of history, the European Renaissance. Now, this wasn't just about, fancy art and old buildings. It was a complete shift in how people thought, a move away from focusing on the divine and the afterlife to celebrating the incredible potential and power of human beings right here on Earth. All right, so here's our game plan. First up, we're going to nail down what Renaissance actually means. Then we'll look at the three huge forces that really shaped it: the Reformation, Humanism, and the dawn of modern science. And finally, we'll see how all of this led to an unbelievable literary explosion in England, especially with a certain guy named Shakespeare. Okay, so what was this rebirth all about? Well, the name itself gives us the biggest clue. So the word Renaissance, it's French, and it literally means rebirth. So what was being reborn? It was the wisdom of the ancient world. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, whose brilliant ideas had kind of been lost to Western Europe during the Middle Ages, were suddenly back in the spotlight. And it was a huge deal. And this is the absolute key. It wasn't just about dusting off some old books. It was a complete 180 in mindset. The medieval world was God-centered, right? All focus was on the afterlife. But the Renaissance, it flipped the script, putting the focus squarely on human life and championing individual reason and a spirit of inquiry. So what was the spark? What kicked this whole thing off? Believe it or not, it was one single event in 1453. When the city of Constantinople fell, scholars fled west into Europe, and they didn't come empty-handed. They brought with them the very manuscripts, the lost knowledge of the ancient world, that would be the catalyst for this incredible new age. Okay, so let's dive into the first major force that really got the Renaissance engine running. And it started by taking on the biggest player on the field, the church. And leading the charge was this German monk, Martin Luther. He was fed up with the corruption he saw in the church and basically argued that people didn't need a giant institution to connect with God. They could go directly to the source, to the Bible. His message was incredibly simple, but also revolutionary. Trust thyself. And this idea sparked the Protestant Reformation, paving the way for a much more individual, human-centered way of thinking about faith. Now here's where it gets really interesting. This new focus on the individual, it didn't just stay in the church. It ballooned into this much wider philosophy that really came to define the entire era. This was the birth of humanism. Thinkers like Pico della Mirandola came along and argued that humanity wasn't just some flawed creation waiting around for the next life. No, they said man was at the very center of the universe. The idea was that the human mind itself was like a divine spark, totally capable of reason, logic, and understanding the entire cosmos. And I love this next part because it shows how huge ideas can come from the most unexpected places. The term humanism wasn't dreamt up by some great philosopher in an ivory tower. It was basically slang coined by university students to describe what they were studying, the humanities. A simple nickname for their coursework ended up naming a movement that would change the world. How cool is that? And that brings us to force number 3, a total game changer, a new way of thinking based on actual reason and observation, something we now call science. Okay, so for centuries, the official story from the church was simple. Earth is the center of the universe. Everything goes around us. I mean, it seems obvious, right? But then you get these guys, Copernicus and Galileo, and they start looking at the actual evidence. And they propose this radical new idea. What if the sun is the center, and we, along with the other planets, are the ones moving? This didn't just change astronomy, it changed humanity's place in the cosmos. And this new way of thinking just opened the floodgates for discoveries. You had William Harvey figuring out how blood actually circulates through the human body, and then you have the printing press. This was the internet of its day. Seriously, it meant that for the first time ever, these revolutionary ideas could spread like wildfire, and that just accelerated the pace of change across all of Europe. So you've got all these incredible new ideas about God, humanity, and the universe just swirling around Europe. So what happens when they finally hit England? Well, the Renaissance got there about a century late, but when it finally landed, it kicked off an unbelievable explosion in literature. And the new hot thing, the must-have literary form, was the sonnet, a 14-line poem that they brought over from Italy. And it just took England by storm. You can see this clear line of progression. It starts with poets like Wyatt and Surrey, then Sir Philip Sidney makes it super popular, and eventually, the master himself, William Shakespeare, comes along and just perfects it. But here's the cool part. The English poets didn't just copy and paste the Italian sonnet. No way. They made it their own. The Italian version usually sets up a problem and then resolves it. The new English form was different. It would build up an idea over 12 lines and then, bam, hit you with a powerful, often surprising, two-line conclusion that completely changes how you see everything that came before. But maybe the biggest, most dramatic change, well, it happened in the drama. The theater went from being a religious lecture to a mirror held up to the human soul. Think about it. In the Middle Ages, plays were basically church sermons with actors. They were about the lives of saints and teaching Christian morals. But Renaissance drama? It was all about the human condition. It dove into comedies, tragedies, and histories. The new themes were ambition, jealousy, love, crime, and power. All the messy, complicated, amazing stuff that makes us human. And who was the master of this new human-centered world? Well, of course, it's William Shakespeare. He wasn't writing about abstract ideas or distant saints. He was writing about people. He was writing about us, filling his stage with real, flawed characters, lovers, villains, kings, and fools. He was holding a mirror up to human nature itself. So what's the big takeaway here? The Renaissance isn't just some dusty old period in a history book. It literally laid the groundwork for our modern world by celebrating reason, individualism, and human potential. Which leaves us with a question to chew on. Where do you see that Renaissance spirit of curiosity and human potential alive in our world today?